Okay, there's a quorum in the room. It's 9:30, so if you can take your seats, we're going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Community and Protective Services Committee, Agenda 13, April 21st. We'll start with declarations of interest. Seeing none, confirmation of minutes 11 from March 21st, 2016, and minutes 12 from April 7, 2016. Carried? Okay, City Manager's Office status update, Community and Protective Services Committee inquiries and motions for the period ending April 14th, 2016. Received? Commemorative naming, Leon Katz Tennis Courts. Carried? Item number 3, commemorative naming Howard A. McGuire Park. Carried? Okay, City Operations, Community and Social Services Department, City of Ottawa Municipal Immigration Strategy 2016 to 2018. We're going to hold that. There is a presentation, so we'll return to it. Item number 5, Child Care Services Plan 2016-2017. That's also going to be held as a presentation, and there is a speaker as well. And then items 6 and 7, we're going to take together the Residential Services Home Program Standards and Housing Services and Community Funding Grants and Contributions, and there is a short presentation, so those items will be held as well. Returning then to our first item that was held, the City of Ottawa Municipal Immigration Strategy 2016 to 2018. Where's Aaron? Uh-oh. Okay. Okay, we lost Mr. Burry, and this is the Aaron Burry show on the agenda today. So, Clara, can I turn it over to you? Do you want to start?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I know Aaron's likely on his way, but we'll jump in with our presentation on the Municipal Immigration Strategy. So the Municipal Immigration Strategy, I'd just like to first start by introducing Hindia Mohamud, who's the Director of the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership, my apologies, and Nicole Sullivan, who's on our team, who has led the development of the strategy from a staff perspective. So the Municipal Immigration Strategy is a term of council strategic priority, so we're pleased to come back to you with the fulfillment of that direction to develop a Municipal Immigration Strategy as part of strategic objective HC1, Advanced Equity and Inclusion for the city's diverse population. This strategy builds on the initial Municipal Immigration Strategy that was approved by Council in 2013. Next slide, Nicole. There are several accomplishments that were realized as part of that strategy in 2013. Since 2013 through to 2015. 2015 was a transition year as we were also creating the refresh strategy. I'd like to highlight that some of the key accomplishments were the establishing of a municipal immigration network, which was the first of its kind here in Ottawa. That's a network of municipal staff, but also a partnership with the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership and the local Francophone resource network for Francophone immigrants. So they both sit at that table with municipal staff, and it's a collaborative planning table. In 2013, we updated and refreshed the immigration portal, with funding from the province, and that has included specific sections, a Francophone community profile, specific information for international students, etc. We launched the Professional Internship for Newcomers program in the City of Ottawa. That is a program that provides Canadian work experience to foreign-trained immigrants who have been already screened through the federal internship for newcomers program. In the City of Ottawa, we've had 14 PIN placements since that program started, 24 temporary contracts across 4 city departments. We have also the Economic Development and Innovation Branch working together on this file with us and other departments has launched the Immigrant Entrepreneurship Awards. Since then, there were 15 award recipients that were recognized and 119 nominees since that award program was started in 2013, which really showcases the contributions of small business owners who are and were immigrants. And we continue our effective and collaborative partnership with the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership. And I'll just hand it over to Hindia, who's going to walk through some of examples of that partnership with you.
Thank you, Clara. Can everyone hear me?
And can you just press the button? Yeah.
The city is part of a collective community effort to attract, integrate, and retain immigrants. And the municipal immigration strategy is aligned with the Ottawa immigration strategy, which was launched in 2011 and now being refreshed. Just a few words about the Ottawa immigration strategy. It represents a community-wide consensus on long-term directions and priorities that Ottawa will need to leverage the contribution of immigrants. The role of the municipality as a government, as employer, and as service provider is critical to Ottawa's success in attracting, settling, and integrating immigrants. On the other hand, the city's work in immigrant integration is fueled by the collaborative efforts of 60 partners that are working in 5 sectors. And these 5 sectors are settlement, language training, education, health and well-being, and social civic integration of immigrants. Immigration continues to be a defining character of Ottawa. 1 in 4 Ottawa residents is an immigrant. And 12,000 new immigrants come to Ottawa every year on average. And these include permanent residents and also temporary residents like international students and others. More than 45% of software engineers, pharmacists, licensed practical nurses, university professors are immigrants. And immigrants are twice as likely to start a business than the Ottawa's resident that is not an immigrant. Therefore, it is clear that the continued work of the City of Ottawa in immigrant integration is critical to Ottawa's social and economic development. Possible.
Thank you, Hindia. So in terms of the revised municipal immigration strategy, this strategy continues along the same lines as the previous strategy in terms of its 3 strategic areas. Our strategy focuses on service delivery, enhancing communications and awareness of city services and other services in the community, and where possible, identifying and implementing employment and economic opportunities to increase the successful economic integration of immigrants. Our strategy aligns with the priorities of the federal government, the provincial government, and as you've heard, with the local community in terms of OLIP's work and that of the réseau as well. That's demonstrated within our strategy in terms of the 16 strategic actions that are arranged under 7 strategic priorities. Those priorities include building our internal capacity to serve and respond to the needs of immigrants in our community, through to supporting the settlement sector and their excellent work in our local community in the pursuit of the same goal, which is the successful integration of immigrants, but also creating a welcoming community for immigrants and newcomers. We have 16 actions that you would have seen in the draft strategy for your approval. They include participating, a continued and renewed commitment to participating on OLIP and as part of the Francophone Immigration Support Network, or the réseau. Focus on integrating refugees, international students, and Francophone immigrants. So those are examples of that alignment with the other two levels of government. And I'll speak on the next slide with regard to some of the work that we've done in support of the integration of refugees, or the welcoming of refugees most recently. One example that you would have seen recently in terms of a memo to you of our focus on international students, the alignment with the provincial government is that we were able to receive receive approval and funding from the provincial government of over $80,000 to implement 2 international student welcome events, both this year and next year. And the province identified that opportunity for us, with us, because of the success that we had had in the previous celebration event last year with over 400 international students. International students continue to be a very, very important priority for the levels of government, provincial and federal, and also for us. Where we can, our strategy opens the door to alignment with 2017 celebrations. So in the event where we can work collaboratively with our partners on either events or new initiatives, they will align with 2017. We want to continue and increase participation in the Professional Internship for Newcomers program, and grow or redevelop the Immigrant Entrepreneurship Award Program with the Economic Development and Innovation Department working with us. So the foundation that we've set as a welcoming community to date, and the work that we've done on the immigration strategy to date in its first iteration, has provided the type of foundation that we needed to come together as a community in the support of the most recent Syrian refugee resettlement efforts. So as you know, Mayor Watson established the Mayor's Working Group in September, held a Syrian refugee forum in October, and has since named Councillor Kakshis as a city special liaison on refugee resettlement. In addition to that, the municipality, within its mandate, has supported the local efforts, the community efforts, and where possible, provided in-kind and other types of support. Just so you have a quick update on the numbers, so since December you would have heard likely that the community of Ottawa has received over 1,500 Syrian refugees in this community. That includes government assistant refugees. That was over 1,100 government-assisted refugees, and the rest are privately sponsored refugees and the blended visa office referral refugees. So over 1,500 refugees, and I have to just take a quick moment to acknowledge the tremendous efforts that have gone into welcoming and housing those refugees in the last 3 to 4 months. The Catholic Centre for Immigrants, or CISO, and other settlement services and partners have done an outstanding job. Every single refugee has been housed. Just to underscore the next steps in terms of that effort, is we are working very closely with both the Catholic Centre for Immigrants and other service providers to start planning now for that so-called month 13 period, where the private sponsorship period will end after the first year, and there will likely be a significant number of government-assisted refugees who may transition to Ontario Works program or the Ontario Disability Support Program. So we're working very closely with our partners right now to begin that planning, and a first step is to really gather data on who those families are in terms of composition and demographic, so that we can form very concrete plans, and where we can transition people to the right types of supports that they need well before they need them. So finally, in terms of the municipal immigration strategy, we have 15 departments that are either leading and or supporting the activities within the strategy. We meet together quarterly, as I mentioned, as an immigration network, and with our OLIP and RESO partners. That is part of the monitoring in terms of implementation. So we have a peer-based monitoring process that occurs every quarter. And because this is an initiative of Council's strategic plan, we do report back to Council annually, and we'll be doing that in terms of the outcomes of the strategy.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ferrer. There is a question, starting with Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, and thank you for the presentation as well. Just a few questions. The action plan bulleted items, sort of the main themes of your action plan, don't specifically talk about advocacy around funding from different levels of government. And I just want to know, is that already embedded in one of the or some of the bulleted points? And if not, why is advocacy for funding not part of the strategic plan?
We've kept the strategy as broad as possible to be able to open the door to supporting the community with their efforts in terms of advocacy and funding where possible. Our work with OLIP is a good example of that. We are on the executive of OLIP and on the council of OLIP, and as they undertake advocacy activities and or identify gaps in funding, we're part of that response. The most effective response to date has been a community-wide response, and also a response of the advocacy-oriented partnerships like OCASI, which is Ontario-based, that bring settlement service leaders together to collate efforts and energy and strategy around advocating to the provincial and federal government. There are funding gaps that continue with regards to settlement services, the regular everyday settlement services. At the same time, what we've seen in terms of the refugee response, the provincial and federal government have come through most recently with regard to one-time or targeted funding for the refugee effort. So right now the community is working together and with their partners across the province to identify what are those advocacy strategies that can continue to move forward, because this is now a very important time. There's lots of momentum. At the same time, and this is an example of how it's embedded, we are also working with the Ontario Municipal Social Services Association to advocate with other municipalities to the provincial government for a retooling or a relook at the Ontario Works shelter allowances, because the real question that's confronting the community right now is affordability of housing and other key supports. So we are doing that advocacy, and that is embedded in our strategy.
Very good. I'd be interested to see at a later date, not today, but if you could follow up with me, areas where you think the provincial and federal government are short in their funding to municipalities, particularly Ottawa, because that gives the elected body not just that information, but when we have our own conversations, we can advocate as well. But I'd like to know, where are we short? I don't know. And just with respect to schools, what type of ongoing communication do we have with the local school community? Because they see the effects as well, where immigrants are one thing, but refugees are even harder to accommodate into the system. And I just want to know what, again, type of ongoing conversations do we have?
Thank you for that question. The school boards as partners are telling us that the demand on their services has increased by 30%, the demand for supports for the refugees. And therefore, we are in constant collaboration and conversation with them to collaborate and build a joint voice as we pursue inputs and funding from provincial education, Ministry of Education. And also, one thing that I may add is that we are collaborating across sectors and in collective impact initiatives that assist young people to succeed in schools. And the immigrants' outcomes in the schools is really linked with low-income situations. Therefore, we are building collaborations across sectors and establishing collective impact. And our work includes advocacy for funding and also seeking the support of the City of Ottawa as we seek these resources to come to our community to remove the challenges that the young people face in the schools.
Thank you. Could you please elaborate on the plans that are in place now? You had touched upon when the funding or sponsorship of, in particular, the Syrian refugees expires, who's going to take over looking after these folks if they're not financially sustainable themselves? What's the plan?
In terms of immigration, and particularly those of federal responsibility, the notion we've used here internally for many years is that immigrants are largely invisible to us as a provincial service provider. In other words, the feds are responsible for that first year. What we are doing this year, which is unprecedented, and Clara spoke to it, is we're actually getting a profile of who it is that is here, what are their circumstances, and preparing for month 13. Because if they do not have the ability to financially sustainable at that point, then they are going to revert to provincial social assistance, the Ontario Works program, which we do administer. So we are looking at, number one, and this is part of the advocacy through the entire part of this, is getting stable housing as much as possible, housing that is affordable right from the get-go, focusing on putting as many supports on the ground, and then looking at, rather than having, which has historically been the process at month 12, thank you very much, our federal responsibility is done, here's social assistance in Ottawa, go give them a call. We're actually we're advancing that so that we're actually working with the families, and we know they're going to transfer to make that much more seamless.
During the pre-budget hearings that this committee hosted last year, I specifically asked why we were not budgeting $1 for the refugee settlement, and I was told because the city wasn't planning to spend any money. So I'm very concerned that I don't know as an elected member what's going to happen in the first month after their federal or private dollars run out. I do fear that the City of Ottawa taxpayers will be on the hook for something that really they shouldn't be.
At that particular point, it's actually the province of Ontario that will be on the hook because the Ontario Works program, by that point, will be virtually 100% funded provincially. So we're not actually on the hook for the actual cost.
But that's one component.
There are other components which the province picks up in terms of, yes, there are health costs, there are other costs, but the majority of them will be provincial. There are local impacts in terms of our local service providers, and I think that's part of what we're working through now to say, if you have whether it's immigrants or whether it's other low-income families, what is the overall burden? And that's what we do as part of the budget process when we bring those forward. And then what's the capacity of council to have measures that can actually address those pressures?
Thank you. Madam Chair, my last question is, when can this committee see what the plan is to when that funding runs out for our new refugee residents after the 12 months? Can we see something in writing that documents that we are on the ball, we are being proactive, there is a plan?
We're looking to have that information in the fall, so to have that refined by September and then bring it back in the fall. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up on the Councillor Brockington question. So after the refugees settle in and then the federal funding stop, are you assuring us, and you're saying right now from my understanding, that the City of Ottawa will not be having a burden that taxpayer is going to end up paying for? Yes, I understand there is a component our provincial, but there is a lots of component also rely on municipal funding between different envelopes and different pockets. So really, it's what I sense the conversation from Councillor Brockington, and I really have concern that really the Ottawa taxpayer are going to be end up paying, flipping bills on many areas, not only the provincial component. So this is a trigger concern, and I really like also to see what is the forecast future where.
I think the first thing that's important to clarify is that Syrian refugees or any other refugees, it is no different. On a typical year, we will accommodate in Ottawa about 2,000 families in exactly the same circumstances. This year, we happen to have a larger number of families in the same circumstances who will be resettled. The primary source of income for refugees right now is the federal program. They receive a monthly allowance from the federal government. At the end of 12 months, if they are not sustainable, in other words, they don't have employment and other issues, they will move at that point to provincial social assistance. So that is not paid or not a burden to the local taxpayers. Where there is issues or where we foresee issues is what are the demands overall on the support services that are required. And we heard earlier in terms of the school boards, we heard earlier in terms of our own support services through our community health and resource centers and the other community-funded agencies that we have. And that is where, at the present time, we would be looking at what is that demand and what does that translate into at that particular point. The majority of funding that comes in to deal with social issues, the city provides some base funding, but the vast majority of it is federal and provincial that comes into the community. So this, I think, is when we were speaking earlier about advocacy and the importance of that, as well as ensuring that the types of grants, the fundraising that's occurred through Refugee 613, all of these things are a combined community effort. In addition, looking at other measures over the first 12 months to stabilize families as much as possible, so that they are more independent, and we have the relative data in terms of what it's been historically. Again, we are continuing to work, and we started this very early rather than the usual process would be the other 2,000 historically. They're invisible to us. We don't actually see them until month 13. This is a very different process. That's why we're doing this. We see this sudden increase in numbers and not wanting to have more issues at that point. In other words, as there were quite a bit of difficulties to get them settled quickly, we don't want to have those same issues in terms of now moving into other programs in 13 months. We'd rather have this in a much more seamless way.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Drews. Councillor Newsbaum.
Thank you, Chair. I think that Mr. Berry's last answer actually addressed the issue that I was going to raise, but there's one aspect of it maybe just to continue, and I was going to speak to the fact that the community resource centers in Ottawa seem to be, at least in my ward, a major arrival point. It's a major center, so we have refugees in my ward who are using it already for the food bank, surprisingly, families with 6 children for whom the federal subsidy is not sufficient. And then, in a very positive way, accessing the social services. The Rita Rockland Community Resource Center is offering language courses. There are a number of Arabic speakers there. So it's a good thing, and I think the Community Resource Center is doing an excellent job of responding to the surge. But I don't think that they were a recipient formally of federal or provincial settlement dollars. Those are going more to the umbrella groups, if I understand that correctly. So on the advocacy point, is there something we can do to, at least make a case for the CHRCs or help them in terms of accessing those settlement dollars? Is there a role for the city to do that, given the fact that they seem to be really the chief places or centers where a lot of that additional work is being done?
The work may be done there, but the settlement agencies are actually funded to do that and should in fact be the primary ones providing those services. They've received quite a bolus of federal increased dollars. Part of the issue for the settlement industry, to be fair to them, is they had under the previous government gone through quite a bit of a reduction. They were losing funding. Now all of a sudden they're having to ramp it all up quickly. I think in the longer run what you're referring to is certainly month 13 in terms of CHRCs after the resettlement process has been done. What are the supports and services? And I think that speaks to the coordination. And next month we will hold, which we do as a department annually, our community conversation, which we bring all of the community providers from all the sectors in. And these will be part of those discussions and part of those examining how our service is actually getting done on the ground and what are the issues we're going to work through. There may in fact be an increased demand for service. One of the things that we would like to be able to produce and provide to committee are those very quantitative data that say, yes, there's been an increase in this, there's been an increase in this, and this is what the demands are. Historically, again, the community resource centers, we provide base funding, but they are and we're intended to leverage funds from other sources and do receive funding from other sources. That's really the intent. So when they have these growth, if they need short-term project funding and so on, they have often leveraged those through other sources.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that as opposed to expecting each of them individually to try and access settlement dollars, is there a coordination role that we can usefully play for them?
As we said earlier, there are 60 organizations across sectors that are constantly thinking about what do we need to anticipate the needs of immigrants and responding to them. And immigrants, as they have joined historically our communities. They are part of the community. And so what we are building is the infrastructure, social connectivity, priorities and ideas so that we can build capacity over a long-term period to be responsive to the new people joining our city. Moreover, I think something that we haven't shared, and there's not enough time for that, is that the contribution of immigrants far outweigh the short-term demands that they may have on our systems. But if these demands can also be overcome if we build the capacities that we need, which the part of the work of the city is. So I think work is underway with health and resource centers, with the school boards, with universities, colleges, with employers, that we are all joining hands and efforts and ideas to build what we need. And thanks to the leadership of the mayor, there's also and Councillor Qaqish, there's also work underway to assist the employers to be responsive to the employment needs of immigrants. So all efforts is put in such a way that there's more contribution than demand, and that is our experience with past flows of immigrants.
Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Councillor Qaqish.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to start off by thanking staff who have been working hard in Mr. Burry's shop, as well as our partners and our settlement agencies over the last few months. I want to address some of the points that were raised by my colleagues, and I can assure them that these are part of the discussions we have all the time at the Mayor's working group, and which includes a number of partners from the community, from the settlement agencies, from the provincial and federal representatives. On the point of advocacy, I've met with Minister Naqvi locally here as the Senior Minister for Ottawa provincially to raise some of the concerns and highlight them. So I want to assure colleagues that has been raised with them. It is on their radar, and we'll continue to do that for next months. And I also want to point out that month 13 is obviously a big concern, and it's something we talk about regularly. So rest assured, we're not in denial. There is going to be challenges ahead. There's no question about that. Whether it's with the food banks or others, but the community has stepped up to the plate in a significant way, and we see this through fundraising efforts through United Way, where we've almost raised $1 million through that, and that would be available, those funds would be available to the settlement agencies and the groups that work with refugees, so that if they need those dollars, they're available there. One of the other things we're also working on is a job fair in June for the refugees, and obviously it's going to be challenging when you have both language and educational barriers to enter into the market. So I think we're putting high expectations on them to have a job and speak a language in 12 months. But we're doing everything we can to get the employers and better understand the demographics of the refugees, especially the GARs, the government assistant refugees that are coming, because obviously those are the most vulnerable and challenging to integrate into employment. So we are getting a better understanding. Some of them have been from the skills and trades industry, others from, I go to at least a couple of refugee events a week, and some of them met one over the weekend who was a chef in Syria and interested in being a cook here. So there's all sorts of different skills and trades that are coming in the GARS demographic, and so we're trying to connect the employers who are interested in mentoring a refugee and working with them, and we're going to do some pre-clinic workshops in advance of that so they can go in prepared and set the expectations in terms of what they can expect out of this job fair, and so that's going to be happening at City Hall in June. So there's a lot of things that are happening in terms of, Councillor Nussbaum talked about the coordination. The Mayor's Working Group, I think, does exactly that. Traditionally in the past, we've seen the many agencies work in silos, but now because of the influx that's coming in a short period of time, everybody has to be around the table and know where everyone is and where they're going, and there's better coordination in that sense, and I think the Mayor set that working group for that specific purpose. Yeah, so, I just want to say there is a lot of stuff going on. We are also working on a technical briefing for colleagues and for federal and provincial, local MPs and MPPs, so we'll keep you posted with that. But like I said, it's not going to be easy breezy. There's lots of work going on behind the scenes, and we're doing everything we can to ensure the successful integration, and I think the community has stepped up in significant ways. I know in my riding alone, there's many groups have been involved with the refugee settlement as well as across the city. So I think this is something we all need to come together to work together to ensure the successful integration. And I think, as pointed out, there's always challenges when they first come. Many of these people are running away from a war zone. They are not here because they want to be here necessarily. Their homes have been bombed in Syria, and many of them have been forced to come here. So I think there is going to be challenges, but they're all here for a better life for their children. And so I think we need to ensure the successful integration of them. And I'm happy to see that there's about a couple of hundred students now that have been enrolled in the schools. And it's important to remember the demographics of the people that are coming. 60% of them are under 14 years of age. So they'll be easily integrated, I think, because they'll absorb everything in schools. There will be more challenges for those adults, but we're working on that as well, and I look forward to your support.
Thank you, Councillor Kakish. Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And just to echo Councillor Kakish's comments, I agree that there is a lot being done behind the scenes that we as public or councillors are not necessarily made aware of. Having said that, though, in terms of there are challenges, but not just the refugees aspect, but any time a new person joins our community. And that in turn puts pressure on other partners, as you mentioned earlier. The thing that I'm trying to understand in my mind, and thank you, Dr. Burry, for your comments about the financial impacts on our resources, and you said, most of it is provincial money in most cases, not all, but most cases. Just keep one thing in mind, though, that provincial funding is probably the 3/4 of the funding, but there is a city component to those fundings. And I just want to understand that at budget time, when you are putting a budget forward, if you could specify as to how much your budget, city part of the budget, is affected due to increased demands, whether it be increased demands from our partners in the community or whether it be increased demands from new residents in the community. And I do agree with you the fact that the refugees do add capacity to this city, as well as other resources, initiatives, and so on and so forth. But my concern is still that little portion of the funding that the city puts into, and give you an example to OPH or Ottawa Public Health as an example. But when we do go out and provide the service, that wasn't counted in the budget for 2016. So I want to know, in terms of resources similar to your department, if we can have that available to us at budget time.
Okay. Madam Chair, do you want that as a direction?
Sure.
Okay. Director.
Thank you, Councillor Kadri. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Belle discussion ce matin. I think one of the important points that's hidden, forgotten in all of this is, as part of the refugee element, is the privately sponsored versus the government-sponsored element. And I, for one, and I'm only speaking from my perspective, I favor the private sponsorship, because already there's housing, already there's community support. On the public front, and I'm now putting on my OCH chair when I'm speaking, we're concerned. We're concerned of that 13 months on. Currently, as you know, we have 3 priorities out of the registry, which the main one being the homelessness population, and we're respecting those 3 priorities. If or when the province would ask us to add a 4th priority, and that might happen in the 13 months after, we would then review the list, but know that we still are working on the same pool of housing that we have. So, that brings a lot of complexities. So we will need to be to not sit on our hands on that front, to make sure that, especially those families, they can come to OCH. We're not closing the door for them, but the new influx we still have the same pressures in housing. As you know, the waiting list is already so long. So we need those private landlords and community support groups to be there, especially following the first year, because there might just be a huge drop, and that's really when our community will start. We'll really need to work together. We've seen great successes. I'm not raising an alarm flag, but following that first year, that's when those families will need additional help.
Thank you, Councillor Floyd. Councillor Druce.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo a couple of things my colleagues have been talking about. I just want to address, I do want to thank Councillor Kakish for his role, and I know he played a very important role in the refugee settlement case, but I also, during the budget pressure, we've heard from many local groups when we are at CPS, and people come and I know lots of community support groups in the city of Ottawa right now working with these groups right now, and I'm just trying to making sure that in the next budget, when the budget pressure is going to come down on these, this is where we're going to feel the pressure. And I'm not trying to raise a flag here, but my colleagues are making great points that we need to look in further than what we're looking right now for two reasons. One of them is the refugee, they come to our country, we work with them, we welcome them, we work with them, but also it's not only the housing, and there is a language barrier, there is ESL, English Second Language. It takes them lots, and I don't think 1 year is sufficient enough for them to get them up on their feet. So it's going to put a pressure on the local community and our local community resources, and that's where I think my colleagues and we're sitting on this table making sure that if there is any support, and Councillor Nussbaum brought a great point that if any, we need to be looking further than what we're looking right now. If there is any support we can get also from the province, as the city can play a role to help these groups and help the refugee committee, that we can be able to look further than what we're looking right now. These are the really concerns that we have, because as you know, that we're not going to be able to support these group 13 on, and then when 2017 budget is going to be released. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Druce. Anyone else? Councillor Kakish?
So I just have a question of staff in terms of historically what information we have in terms of, after month 12, not with the Syrian case now, but in the past, what historically has been, because, I see some research and some studies say, well, it's a matter of time, it's rough in the first year, but does it take 1, 2, 3 years for them generally to integrate into the job market, or?
If you look at generally in terms of the general population of social assistance, we have approximately 2,000 families that come in a month and approximately 2,000 families that go out a month. The typical time on social assistance varies, but you're looking at families that are on average around 15 months on the Ontario Works program before they exit. There are families, depending on their circumstances, who are particularly more vulnerable, who will be on longer. If they're moving into the Ontario Disability Support Program, as disabled children or disabled parents, that's a completely different issue. But generally, the way that assistance is generally short-term. The areas which we're looking at are what is the likelihood of success and so on. We know that historically somewhere around 40% of government sponsored typically wound up on social assistance after the 12 or 13-month period. Will that be the same or more? That's why we're doing the pre-work that we're doing. The other thing that I think will be helpful when we report back in September, and just chatting with Claire a little bit, is there are specific federal funds that have been set up. There is a federal welcome fund, which for this community is about $450,000. That will be dispersed between now and then. So we want to make sure that we provide you with the best summary we can of what are the various additional funds that have been set up that agencies are applying for, and that funding that's actually coming into the community to offset things like English as a second language. We've been advocating that a lot of those federal programs continue 2 years, not 1 year, for this very reason. So the federal government has been saying, well, here are pockets of funding to go out and continue those. And I do believe, as you are identifying, I think it is going to take longer than 12 months, and particularly given that there was a delay in how they arrived into Canada, and that they're often in hotels, and it was a longer resettlement initial process, we would expect that you're not looking at a full 12 months. You're really looking at 10, 9, somewhere in that area. So I would agree that this is the notion where all of these things need to continue after the 12 months, those additional supports. And that's, again, why we're looking at the families, what supports are in place, and what do we need to do to continue to advocate to keep those things in place with the existing agencies rather than trying to find something after month 12.
And on the bureaucratic side of things, have you had success with our federal and provincial counterparts? I know we've had political meetings and you've been involved with some of those, but in terms of the...
Well, I think the fact that there's money coming in and there has been bump up, and I think last week I think was a good indication that the Fed spent a lot more money a lot more quickly than they had planned to do. And I think those reports indicate the level of pressure. I think, to be fair to everybody, we've had to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour. The previous 5 to 6 years had been really retrenching and removing out of this. Now all of a sudden we're back into the game and we're having to actually expand what we do and do it quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kakish. Anyone else? Carried on the recommendations? Thank you. Turning then to the Child Care Services Plan, Mr. Burry.
Thanks very much. Just we'll have our guests who are with us to come forward as well as part of this report. Merci. Sorry. It says to smile a lot. Yes. Madam Chair, I'm going to introduce our co-presenters this morning related to the 2016 through 17 Child Care Services Plan. I have Rachel Clark down at the end. She's the manager of Child Care Services. She will have all the details and anything that you'll need with respect to that. Francine Baudouin, Directrice Générale de la Coccinelle, will also be presenting this morning, and Terry McGyver, who's the Executive Director of the Children's Place. J'aimerais vous présenter mes co-présenteurs aujourd'hui, Rachel Clark, gestionnaire des services de l'enfance, Francine Baudouin, directrice générale de la Coccinelle, Terry McGyver, directrice générale de Children's Place. What we're going to be going through today, and I just want to provide you a little bit of context on the 2016 to 17 plan. There are really two elements that we are dealing with throughout this plan to summarize it. One is how do we maintain the amount of funding for subsidy so that low-income families can continue to access essentially the same level of financial support through 2016 that they saw previously. And the other element is related to the continuing and ongoing change that is happening throughout childcare. Although the province introduced early learning in 2010 and that implementation was finished in 2014 to 2015, we know that basically the outflow of that's going to continue for another 4 or 5 years or longer. In addition, as part of that, we know last year they introduced, as part of this overhaul, new legislation and so on, some Phase 1 recommendations, and those have had some pressures. So this report is recommending essentially an additional amounts of money to help deal with this, and primarily to go through what are, I think, Ottawa's key challenges. Certainly what we had anticipated when we presented the budget to you was that we would receive approximately $1 million more in subsidy funding this year. That was based on what we saw in 2013, the 2012-2013 evaluation. We'd received $4 million additional, $2 million additional. We thought for this year $1 million addition would be reasonable. We actually did not get that. The province has adjusted the amount down by that amount by 1.2, leaving us a gap of overall 2.2. In terms of our reserves and what you approved in 2015, we already have a stabilization fund, and that stabilization fund is intended to basically provide agencies who are receiving less overall total government funding in the next few years as a result of the provincial funding formulas that have been adjusted to make sure that they're stable and sustainable. So again, a lot of our plan is based on sustaining childcare and maintaining it at its current state, despite these fluctuations. Next slide, Rachel. So again, in terms of the community priority fundings, and these were presented as our suggestions for discussion to the community in February, and this was their recommendation and discussion for us to bring forward to you. So again, within our funding priorities are $2.2 million to maintain fee subsidy. Again, expanding the emergency bridge funding from 2016 to 2020, so approximately $1 million of emergency bridge funding. And the intent there is to deal with new legislation. We know this internally in terms of our own municipal centers. Because of these new regulations, we had to hire 4 additional staff to meet the new regulations. So it really increased our costs. And our agencies are experiencing similar changes in terms of the things that they have to support, training, development, and so on. And as they're already part through a year, it can often be difficult or impossible to start recharging or adjusting things to meet those. So we do have emergency bridge funding that is being recommended as part of this. In addition, a small amount to maintain the exact same level of funding and special needs for the total fund of 5.7. These are essentially, again, just I think redirecting where did we funds and how are we where are we coming out for this. We're redirecting some funds which are underutilized, or there's other allocations that are available to cover them. We have some unallocated municipal childcare funding at the present time of $700,000. We do have, and we're suggesting some one-time commitments from the reserves, as well as a municipal health and safety capital fund of $1.6. And the reason for this is there's access to other provincial funding. So again, just to go through where the various sources are coming from and how they're lined up. Okay. Ask Rachel to take it here in terms of the actual role and some of the changes in terms of our responsibilities here at the city.
So in August of 2015, the province introduced the new Child Care and Early Years Act, replacing the old Day Nurseries Act. With this new act, there's a lot of significant change for municipalities across the province. We are now legislated to maintain the provincial interest. The regulations associated with the Act will be implemented with increased costs related to changes in health and safety measures and staffing, as Aaron just described to you as well. The Phase 2 regulations were not supported by parents and stakeholders, and the province has agreed to rethink these regulations. They were related to certification of staffing and child and staff ratios. So although the regulations are still under development, we know that the Act will result in increased responsibilities for the city. Those responsibilities will include the requirement to do system planning for the early years sector, and implementing and managing early years programs and services, including the Ontario Early Years Child and Family Centres that were announced by the Province of Ontario in February of this year. So despite these changes and increased responsibilities for municipalities, the province has provided no new funding to municipalities across the province. As a result of these and other provincial changes, the city has been working very closely with the Stakeholder Reference Group. The Stakeholder Reference Group is the city's primary consultative body since 2013 in order to develop and implement strategies related to 4 specific areas: viability and sustainability of our service providers, quality childcare, prioritized access to fee subsidy, and professional development, or what the province funds us for, capacity building. We are pleased to have 2 of our community partners here today to speak to you, and I would like to invite Francine Baudouin, Directrice Générale de la Coccinelle, to speak to you first about the Quality Work Group.
Bonjour, hi. First of all, I would like just to say thanks to the social community, department services for all it's an extraordinary team. They really work with us. They help us go through all those changes that affect the daycares, and just wanted to mention it. So I was part of the reference group and the quality committee, and I will continue in French if you don't mind. Donc, le groupe de travail sur la qualité a été formé de fournisseurs de services de garde, des directions, des gestionnaires de services de garde d'Ottawa. Et on s'est réunis à plusieurs reprises pour déterminer qu'est-ce qui pourrait soutenir les services de garde dans tous ces changements-là. Nous avons aussi déterminé que pour maintenir la qualité des services de garde, nous devions utiliser le document de la pédagogie « Comment apprend-on » fourni par le ministère de l'Éducation. Nous avons déterminé que c'était la base de la qualité dans les services de garde. Le groupe a donc ciblé trois grandes catégories, trois grandes cibles, la communication, la formation et les ressources. Au sujet de la communication, le groupe a reconnu que le ministère de l'Éducation a beaucoup de bonnes ressources pour les services de garde. On recommande donc que la Ville rende ces documents disponibles sur son propre site Web pour que les services de garde puissent aller à un endroit et trouver tous les documents pour les appuyer dans leur travail. Tous ces documents seraient disponibles au ottawa.ca garde d'enfants. Nous recommandons également d'adopter une approche plus coordonnée et plus simplifiée pour communiquer avec les services à l'enfance. La Ville a depuis créé une liste de diffusion électronique, donc les services à l'enfance s'inscrivent sur cette liste et reçoivent toutes les mises à jour et les nouveaux changements. Concernant la formation, nous avons constaté qu'il y a un grand besoin d'offrir de la formation aux directions de services de garde, mais surtout aux conseils d'administration qui sont moins au courant de tous les changements qui s'en viennent. Et les conseils d'administration doivent être au courant des changements pour mieux supporter leurs équipes dans les services de garde. Donc, nous allons offrir 2 forums. Nous prévoyons offrir un forum pour les superviseurs et les conseils d'administration en automne, et puis un forum au printemps pour les éducateurs et éducatrices de la petite enfance, ceux qui travaillent directement auprès des enfants. Nous nous sommes rendus compte aussi que nous avons souvent l'habitude de faire venir des leaders de Toronto puis de l'extérieur, et que finalement, ici à Ottawa, nous avons beaucoup de leaders qui ne savent peut-être pas qu'ils sont des leaders dans le domaine. Donc, le forum du printemps, ce sera des éducatrices qui ont mis en place des bonnes stratégies, des choses qui ont bien fonctionné pour faire face à tous les changements de petite enfance, et qui vont partager ça avec d'autres éducatrices. Nous allons créer des leaders ici, dans notre région, dans les services de garde. Et vous savez qui vont en bénéficier? Ce sont les enfants et les parents. Les parents qui peuvent quitter pour aller travailler la tête tranquille en sachant que les enfants sont dans un service de garde de qualité. Tout ça, c'est pour maintenir et augmenter la qualité dans les services de garde de la région. De plus, concernant les ressources, nous avons recommandé de développer un outil commun pour faire connaître toutes les ressources de formation dans la région. Il y a beaucoup de formations un peu partout pour les leaders, pour les conseils d'administration, pour les éducatrices. Et nous voulons que ce soit facile pour les gens d'aller à un seul endroit et d'avoir toutes les ressources, cliquer sur une ressource et savoir comment s'inscrire à cette formation-là ou aller chercher l'information pour cette formation-là. Parce qu'il y en a beaucoup dans la région qui sont un peu éparpillés partout. Donc, j'ai présenté toutes ces stratégies-là au mois de février à tous les services de garde de la région francophone. Et puis, toutes ces stratégies-là ont été vraiment bien accueillies. Tous les services de garde attendent avec impatience ces stratégies-là pour les supporter. Parce que vous savez, les gros changements qu'il y a en ce moment dans les services de garde, c'est beaucoup pour les gestionnaires des services de garde. Puis on a vraiment besoin d'appui pour passer à travers ça, justement pour avoir des services de garde toujours de haute qualité. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Francine. I would like to now invite Terry McIver, Executive Director of Children's Village, Children's Place,
okay.
a licensed daycare center at the City of Ottawa, to speak to you about viability and sustainability.
I too would like to thank staff and have council know how supportive they have been of the childcare community through this process. It's been 3 years with the Stakeholders Committee, and they've walked us through baby steps on this, and it has been a challenge. The expert panel on viability and sustainability was developed as part of the City Stabilization Initiative and planned to help support the viability of local licensed childcare agencies. It was initiated in 2015 following the implementation of the new funding model for agencies. The purpose of the expert panel was to provide advice and guidance to the City on key components of childcare viability and sustainability. The panel was tasked with identifying key challenges facing childcare agencies and determining what elements agencies should agencies should or could consider for ongoing viability, while also considering what support and tools the City could offer. The members of the group included experts in the finance and not-for-profit sector, local licensed childcare agencies, and City staff. The panel was able to define viability and sustainability, and that was quite a task, and summarize key elements that agencies should consider as part of developing viability plans. The panel has recommended that agencies consider issues of governance, operations, and finance in their business plans. With the City's commitment of $11.5 million for sustainability funding, agencies have time to adjust to the new funding model. Agencies will be required to balance their operational budget while keeping fees affordable to parents, and the expert panel has recommended specific tools to assist agencies with managing their financial and operational health. The tools they've talked about is a business plan template. It was produced to help agencies get started with developing a business plan. Boards can use this tool to help them document their current situation and consider their options. The City will also be providing benchmarking information, including the average budget by expense category and the average rates for care. The tools were presented at the childcare consultations held in February and endorsed by the licensed childcare community. During these consultations, training for leaders and decision makers was outlined as a priority. As a result, there will be a forum on leadership and governance on May the 14th, sponsored by the province as part of the provincial capacity building funding. Training is targeted at executive directors and boards of directors. Experts in the fields of business, finance, and the not-for-profit sector will provide hands-on workshops that will help agencies to understand the tools and how they can use this information in developing their business plans and work towards becoming viable under the new funding model for agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is that it, Dr. Burry?
Actually, it's...
Or do you want
I can't hear you.
I don't know if now it's working. We do have a few more slides. You want us to continue the presentation?
Yeah.
Okay. Rachel?
I'm just going to talk to you briefly about prioritized access to fee subsidy. A child care fee subsidy is what helps to cover the cost of child care, either partial coverage or full coverage. Out of the 8,800 children currently registered for a space on the City's registry, approximately 11% have applied and been approved for fee subsidy. Until the end of 2015, subsidized child care spaces were attached to specific child care providers with guaranteed fee subsidy funding, previously referred to as maximum confirmed budgets. This historical MCB, or maximum confirmed budget process, resulted in many challenges for providers and for children. For example, the proportion of subsidized spaces attached to the agencies did not necessarily reflect the demand in local neighborhoods, thereby resulting in underutilization of fee subsidy funding. Also, parents eligible for a fee subsidy often accepted any subsidized space, regardless of proximity to their preferred geographic location. On January 1st, 2016, Ottawa moved to a more flexible fee subsidy model that offers choice to parents and allows funding to be portable. Families who qualify for financial assistance with childcare costs can now choose where to access licensed childcare, as long as that childcare service provider has a space available within their licensed capacity and has a signed contribution agreement with the City of Ottawa. There have been benefits to parents and providers with this new model. With the new funding model, 26 new agencies now offer a fee subsidy space for children. This results in about 1,300 new licensed spaces that parents can now access, and it provides parents more choice on where to access care. And parents who qualify for financial assistance can now transfer from one provider to another without impacting their access to funding as their needs for childcare changes. And for childcare providers, they are now funded based on a number of subsidized children in their centers, and there is no longer a limit to the number of children with a fee subsidy that a childcare service provider can accept. Since January 1st, the City has received positive feedback from providers and parents about the new model. And based on financial data available to date, we are on track to maximize the fee subsidy budget in 2016.
Madam Chair, one of the areas that committee directed us to review was our own direct operations here at the City. The City has operated at this point 11 child care centers itself. That represents just a little under 2% of the total spaces that are available. And the purpose of this is to make sure that we were, in fact, maintaining our services according to the original mandates and or the original concepts that councils of the day approved those services. We also needed to look at what the impacts were around full-day early learning, what the province was specifically doing in terms of investing in schools, taking into consideration that the province has added over 11,000 new licensed spaces in Ottawa since 2010, which is really phenomenal growth. The issues and the things that we're talking about today are very different than what we would have talked about a decade ago in terms of childcare. And one of the areas that we were also concerned about is the increasing number of full fee paying parents. And there are parents who are not supposed to be receiving government funding who are beginning to access our programs. So we have completed that review. And essentially what we are suggesting as part of this report is that over the next 5 years, we need to ensure that our programs are treated and responsible in the same way as the community-based programs. So very much as Terry was talking about the viability and sustainability and the process we're going through with community-based agencies, to apply those same scope, those same lens to our municipal childcare, and to give us about 5 years to reassess what is happening with those services and to improve their overall financial performance as part of that. The last element in the report relates to development charges, and at this point we have a little over $4.5 million in that area that has been collected for development charges. And what we are proposing is to issue a request for qualifications in the fall when the majority of providers will be at capacity to be able to respond to it. And this is essentially what we need to, the essential element of development charges is to be specifically used for the growth in childcare spaces. And growth does not equal demand, and it doesn't necessarily equal, or it can't be used for renovation. So it's a very specific amount of funding that has to be able to demonstrate that we're actually purchasing a growth in the relative amount of childcare. We know with the way that our present wait list, which is now operating, and beginning that we now have the first 4 or 5 months of data, that we're able to very accurately predict what the needs are going to be in terms of childcare. But it is going to take 1 or 2 years of complete data to be able to start those trending models so we know exactly what the demand and what the potential growth in childcare will be over the next few years. And it's all of these supportive things that we're going to use to inform a development charge study at that point.
Is that the end of the presentation? Okay, thank you all very much for the presentation. There is one public delegation, so we'll call him now. Dick Stewart.
Is he as an individual or is he representing?
Nice to see you, Mr. Stewart. Are you representing an organization today?
I am here as Dick Stewart, private citizen.
Okay, welcome, Dick Stewart, private citizen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Overall, the Child Care Service Plan has a lot of positive elements to recommend it, and I won't be speaking about those. I'm going to be speaking about 2 issues that are important to me. The first issue is that this is the first Child Care Service Plan that I can recall that does not state emphatically the number of subsidized spaces that the budget will support. And I understand the dilemma that staff have, because this is a flexible, ever-changing environment, but I've done some math based on the documents provided, the service plan and the staff report, and I've concluded that the average cost of a subsidized space is about $10,500, and that would result in the $69 million subsidy budget would support about 6,500 subsidized spaces. So I'm asking whether staff can confirm that number. So why am I so preoccupied with the confirmation of that? This is about transparency, Madam Chair. This is a very important program, as Aaron has indicated, to the low-income community, and it's important to track the number of subsidized spaces year over year. If not in actual numbers, then at least in estimates. So I would suggest that further child care service plans subsequent to the 16-17 report have as a basis and a basic element the number of subsidized spaces. My second issue is with respect to what Aaron just mentioned, and that is the removal of child care from the development charge bylaw. And specifically, I'm referring to page 17 of the staff report, where there's introduced 4 different rationales to support that removal. And my position, Madam Chair, is that those rationales are at best misleading and in some cases not even correct. The first item, the first rationale was the reduction of families below the low-income cutoff and the lower use of subsidized spaces. I recall when the child care was put into the development charge bylaw in 1998, and it very clearly was put into the bylaw as a basis of a public service for all families, not necessarily just poor families. So I'm not sure why that rationale supports the removal. The second issue was that there's a lot of provincial capital coming into the schools in this environment, and Aaron has indicated the growth in the number of licensed spaces in the past couple of years. I acknowledge that. However, the city has a fundamental responsibility for children 0 to 3.8 years, I point to the example of other services where provincial capital has come into our community, and specifically the broadening and widening of the Queensway, the 4-lane extension to Carleton Place of Highway 7. Nobody considered, when those funds arrived, removing the roads section of the development charge bylaw. So I find the rationale that since there's money coming from the province, we don't need to actually include it in the development charge for child care a bit erroneous. The third item was lack of vacancies, but lack of vacancy numbers. So I would suggest, and Aaron's just mentioned, that demand is not necessarily growth. I acknowledge that. I understand the development charge bylaw very clearly. However, of those 9,000 families on the current wait list, there's a portion of that which is beyond demand. It is growth. And I would contend that we still have some growth issues. And we're not in a position of oversupply of child care spaces. And finally, the impact of floating subsidies is not yet known. I would refer you to my comments on item 1, that this is a service that's for all families and not just poor families. I note that the document, the staff report says that staff will start a new background study once all funds are utilized. In reality, we all know that the child care reinsertion into the development charge bylaw cannot happen until January 2019, as per the council decision to accept the negotiated settlement with the development industry. Meanwhile, child care is missing out on about 5 years of development charge revenues going into a reserve fund, and that's approximately $2.5 million. That's at best lamentable, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there questions to the delegation? Mr. Stewart, before you leave, I just have a question, because you were talking about child care being for everyone, and I agree, working families absolutely need child care. In our documents, it says that the municipal child care programs are there to serve vulnerable families in the area of the city. So the province has responsibility overall, and the city has responsibility for vulnerable families. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that, but that represents 2% of the licensed spaces. So the city's responsibility for vulnerable families goes beyond the municipal program.
Right. So when you're saying in the development charge bylaw, you're saying we should be looking at that globally for all, making sure that in growth we have the facilities in place for all families.
What I was referring to, Madam Chair, was the basis upon which child care was put into the development charge bylaw in 1998, and it was specifically for poor families. It was for all families. It was seen as an essential public service, and that growth in population will demand more child care centres to be built, and therefore the regional government at that time inserted it in the bylaw.
So that's for the capital construction. That doesn't mean that the city would necessarily run those.
No, absolutely
because
not.
The city's mandate locally is for vulnerable families, but in the development charge bylaw, we would have the money to construct so other providers could run those programs.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay. Anyone else to Mr. Stewart? Councillor Nussbaum.
Well, just a question to staff arising from the delegation, just to kind of understand a little bit the approach to the development charge issue. So the request for qualification to be issued in the fall of 26 is for the $4.5 million, and so that will be exhausted. Is it the intention now to be a part of the background study that is currently being contemplated for, it's actually sometime before 2019, because what we learned through Planning Committee was that there is likely to be a revision of the development charge bylaw before that, and then that might be the only opportunity we have for another 5 years. So given the fact that the development charge background study will be done during a period when you're spending the 4.5, and you're going to have to make a decision whether you want to be a part of that, because that will be the only opportunity within a 5-year window. Do you have a sense yet as to whether, I mean, essentially what I'm saying is the report actually doesn't reflect well with the reality, because you may not be in a position to exhaust the money and then decide. You may have to make a decision in 2017 as part of the development charge review.
I think it's all part of the process, and I think we would have and be in a better position to respond to this based on the work we're doing with the province, based on what we're looking at now in terms of what do they actually plan to build. And I think this study will help with that, as well as the RFP, in terms of what is the funding that's available and what growth related above what the province wants to do with these particular dollars by. We'll have that information. It can all feed in. I think what we're trying to do is answer a whole variety of questions that update where has this, when this was conceived in 1998 and where are we now in 2016. It's a fair number of years since that time. Where are we and what do we actually need to look at in terms of a charge for childcare at this particular point. We will also have, which is coming in now, we have it since January, where agencies are reporting vacancy rates, and we're looking at those as well as what are underutilized programs. Before we get into building and adding a whole bunch of more, what's the actual supply out there, and get a handle around that.
Okay, is that it, Councillor?
Well, just a quick factual follow-up. The issue, of course, is if there is a decision made by Council to insert the development charge into the review that happens in 2017, Mr. Stewart alluded to this, we can do it, but it's subject to the veto power of the Greater Ottawa Home Builders Organization, something that Council passed back in the fall. So technically we have the ability, but we need the people who are paying the charges to agree to them. So it's not as if we can't do it before January 1st, 2019. We can, but Council in its wisdom granted the veto power to the very people who are going to have to pay it. Thank you.
Well, as Councillor Shirelli likes to say, Council is always right. Anyway, just one other, before you go, Mr. Stewart, you had raised the issue of the number of subsidized spaces. And Mr. Bray, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak about that. Why is the report silent on that, and do we have those numbers?
We do. To provide, for example, where we are as of today, we're purchasing 7,200 subsidized spaces today. What we are reporting on, which is the most important issue from our perspective at this point, is how much money do we actually have to buy those spaces. The numbers go up and down depending on what is it that's coming in off the wait list and what are we buying. So as of today, we're at 7,200. We can provide, and I believe I haven't checked, but we'll provide next year as part of the service plan, what do the average numbers of spaces look like? Because we're in a different system this year. We will be able to report back on what did it look like over the last 12 months. We are trying to get out of the notion of projecting spaces that because it depends on what we're actually buying on a month-by-month basis. And I think we can provide that. That would show you what has the trend been and what are we looking forward in terms of that. But it really focuses on how much money do we have to buy the spaces for the people who are on our wait list today and who are prioritized for those spaces.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Anyone else for Mr. Stewart? Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. Before we go to questions, I just want to, I think it's following on this this issue of this subsidy, but can you just clarify for me how it is that the City of Ottawa was the only major municipality in Ontario in 2016 to actually get less money?
I really wish the Ministry of Education were here and they could answer the question, because they're the ones who determine this. Number one is one of the things is the funding formulas are not easily accessible. They're not as though they're published on a website where we can go and have a look at this. So we did have to inquire quite a bit and go through some discussions as to how they made the determination. The basic information in terms of there were two elements that they indicated to us. Number one is that based on the Statistics Canada's data, the relative proportion of low-income families in Ottawa was lower in other areas of the province where there has been a growth in those numbers of families. So primarily in the GTA area, there's a larger proportion of low-income families provincially, and this did affect some degree of the funding formula. The second part of the formula, and we believe it's a bit of a false premise because it's not backed up by solid data that we have here, is based on how much 100 municipal dollars were required to be put into the subsidy pool. We're also running on a 4-year, the numbers that we use for this year are based on 2014. 2014 was for Ottawa one of the most difficult years. It's when they introduced full-year early learning, and it was a year in which we had $3 million in unused subsidy dollars. We did explain all of this in our service plan. We did indicate to the province, and I can tell you that my request was, based on us shifting to a subsidy following child, we know in 2016, unlike other years, we will be fully expended. And today we are on target to that full expending, and that's why we have 7,200 spaces out there being funded, because we're using the maximum dollars to the maximum spaces. So the province has made this adjustment. We did ask them that we weren't getting as well credit for other municipal investments that you're making. So we asked, can we not get credit for the $11.5 million that we're investing to solve other problems related to quality, related to stability in the sector? Can that not be taken into consideration here? And could you not keep the money stable for us, at least for the next couple of years, while we move through these other transitions? We did not get a specific answer, but I didn't get a check for another $1 million, so I presume that that's the answer.
So, it sounds like the provincial system, the new system is quite flawed, or it certainly is from our perspective as a municipality. Are we expecting future years when, I understand the perfect storm that happened in 2014, right. But are we expecting the numbers to go up in future years?
The way that we have positioned this particular investment is based on if they hold the formulas and all the assumptions the same going forward, then this should attract the degree of increased subsidy in terms of provincial dollars coming forward into the future. That is the intent of why we're investing the reserve dollars into subsidy. That's 100% municipal, so based on your assumption that if municipalities had to put in money, that means you must have had a wait list. What we've said to them is, we can prove we had a wait list. Here it is. We have the numbers. Not all other municipalities have put the same degree of effort into developing the accuracy that we have here around our wait list. We have basically, we're the pioneers in this. We are the first out the gate, and we've developed a wait list that works differently than it does anywhere else in the province at this point.
So the province has not been adding any money into the child care portfolio?
Not when it comes to subsidy. The dollars are very restricted, and this is where, in terms of the ability to buy spaces, we have been in this subsidized zone of about 6,000 to 7,000 for some time. There is additional money. They did put $4 million in 2014. They put $2 million in 2015. That's why we anticipated, on the basis of that, we should get approximately another $1 million. And I think, as the report points out, for the first time, I think we're within striking zone of being able to eliminate the whole notion of a wait list for financial assistance with childcare. An initial $8 to $9 million would essentially eliminate the wait list for subsidy based on what we're seeing right now. So I think this is good news, but at the same time, I think the funding formulas are causing this movement of money, which is causing some degree of challenge for us as managers to manage these dollars on behalf of the province, and that's going to mean the taps will have to get shut off and turned off depending on what they decide going forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Aaron, could you reconfirm what you just said? So what would be the amount, or what's the movement so that we would eliminate the wait list for subsidy?
Right now, if we take an average of about 900 children on the wait list, these are individuals who we've pre-qualified them. We know that there are spaces out there we could place them in. We don't have dollars to be able to fund them for those spaces. It would be about $8 to $9 million of provincial dollars right now would close that and eliminate that gap. And that is, to some extent, I think, showing the technologies and what we're doing. We used to be able or project that 1 out of 2 families would actually be subsidized. We know now that it's a much smaller group of individuals that we need this financial assistance for, and this is the group that we're hoping that over the next few years that the province can start to close this gap so that there aren't wait lists as there are in other communities in Ontario. Okay, so as part of the budget, this another section, it's not related to this, I just wanted clarity on this, but as part of the budget, we asked, or we assumed, more money from the province, realized we're $1 million less than what we expected initially. So I understand you ran us through those numbers. Talk to me about the reserve. So you're asking that we use the monies from the reserve, the $2.2 million, and then what's left in the reserve, and what's the risk for 2017? So essentially, with the total package that you have in front of you, in terms of your total reserves, $11.5 million of it is already committed, and those $11.5 million are committed towards stabilizing the child care industry with respect to the challenges it's facing financially, and to achieve those other goals that the province has outlined in terms of stabilizing fees and making sure that child care remains accessible. You have another $3.5 million, which is essentially being allocated towards the stability, or in terms of emergency funding, over the next 4 years. And essentially what this will do with those two amounts, what's proposed here is that essentially we do not anticipate that there will be additional monies coming into the reserves. Reserves have occurred because we've not been able to fully expend subsidy dollars. This year, we will fully expend subsidies, so there won't be dollars left over that will go into a reserve. So going forward, this is why it's very important to see what the province comes out with, and I think it's important to remember that this is a provincial-based program. Their funding formulas are now approaching this not from it being an Ottawa versus this, they're looking at this on a province-wide basis, and that is what is causing some of this migration in terms of dollars.
Okay. I think as part of that, it might be important for the chair at committees will, obviously, to articulate those challenges locally, because, like you said, the province has its formula, but if because of demographic, if because of location we're shortchanged, we should be able to say, hey, by the way, we used reserves this year, and here's what the City of Ottawa is expecting in 2017.
Yeah, I think the City of Ottawa has done a tremendous amount to stabilize the provincial system in this particular region. You've made some significant investments to maintain the service. I think it does require now a provincial strategy that says, how are we going to stop this flow of money and really focus on making sure that we close these gaps and fund those last services for those who are on subsidized wait lists.
Mr. Stewart was asking before the amount of money that was going in and the amount of spaces subsidized this year. So can you run us through where we've been in the past few years and where we're heading?
How many spaces you actually get depends on what are the things that are asked for, because the spaces all cost different amounts of money. So trying to average them out is difficult. Historically, we were in around the 6,300 to 6,500 projected. How many we actually bought out of that was difficult to determine. Now, with the way we have it set up, the new technology, we're able to project, and as of today, we're buying 7,200. Going forward, being able to buy spaces, those extra 1,000 I was referring to, if we had the dollars, you need to have that $8 to $9 million more, in other words, go from 70 million, go to 80 million in those areas. Then we would be able to buy the balance of those individuals, and those would translate into whatever those individuals needed on that wait list. And those vary depending on acuity of the child, age of the child, whether it's a pre- or after-school program in schools, all those things. So a space is not a space is basically what I'm saying. So the dollars are what are really important, and then do you have enough to actually move the people who are on the wait list off the wait list because you've got sufficient dollars to buy the care they actually need.
And then, I don't know if it's tied into this, but I know that the province, I mean, we've been in discussions for a few years now because of other sites, but we know that the province is submitting, as announced, locally 350 spots over a 3-year period. How does this attach to this report? And what do we get the funds, or is that going from the province directly to those new providers?
This is part of the shift in responsibilities, and Rachel alluded to it in terms of new legislation. And the new legislation essentially changes what our role is in terms of childcare. And we are now a system service manager on behalf of the province of Ontario. As part of that, the province is directly injecting funds into the community and announcing these spaces. And I think this is where we're saying it's now, if you want us to play the service manager role, and that's where I think the new directives, the new legislation is coming in, we will now eventually be involved in looking at where those spaces go and what is the planning for this going forward. How that all happens is still subject to discussion and directives with the province. I'm very unclear as to what they expect us to do in those areas, but I'm working with Rachel and her staff that we clarify what it is that we're supposed to be doing here, because they're making an announcement, but we don't necessarily know where those spaces are or what's happening with them, and yet we're expected to somehow manage a system.
But we're not being, so those 350 spaces are announced provincially, and then there's new funds allocated to that aren't reflective in that.
It's completely separate. That's where they've taken that role of developing and adding and growing the child care system, is the province is overseeing the licensing and the growth of child care. What we're saying is when you're trying to service plan that, it's very difficult to do this in terms of saying which agency should we be invest. Is this one that's making some of that coordination and planning of service, which I think will improve over the next few years as we get A, clearer directives, B, as we continue this discussion about what our role is, and then we make sure that we're reporting back on it. Everything that we have built over the last 3 to 4 years towards this new technology, everything we're doing is to allow us to manage the system and to respond to this new legislation.
Rapidement, comment on fait pour protéger les objectifs de la direction des services en français puis du département face au nombre d'espaces disponibles à la communauté francophone dans ces modifications?
C'est-à-dire, on regarde toujours le nombre de places qui sont disponibles en français. À Ottawa, on a vraiment une distinction entre des services qui sont en anglais et des services qui sont en français. Nous, à ce moment, on regarde simplement le nombre de places. La province a certainement une responsabilité, mais on assure que ça déplace finalement un taux de minimum de 15% au lieu de subvention. Et sur l'autre côté, le nombre de places générales sont à peu près 24% en ce moment qui sont disponibles. Alors, ça aussi va parler de notre liste parce que les parents peuvent indiquer le service, leur désir d'avoir dans quelle langue. Et dans ce point-là, on peut avoir aussi la possibilité de faire pas simplement des sondages, mais aussi d'assurer que les programmes s'augmentent dans les secteurs ou dans les endroits qu'ils ont besoin.
Puis ma dernière question, c'est au sujet de Beau-Soleil précisément. Alors, on sait qu'il y a de la construction présentement à Beau-Soleil, on a fermé le site, le logement communautaire protège les espaces. À partir de ce plan-ci, est-ce qu'on peut réenvisager la réouverture à la fin des travaux?
Je crois que ça reste avec OCH s'il va être ouvert parce que nous, on a pu une loyer avec Soloco. Donc, si mettre sur le marché, on regarde ça dans l'objectif de la mandat, ce qu'on avait mis dans le rapport aujourd'hui, c'est est-ce qu'il y a vraiment un besoin de services pour les parents qui sont vulnérables dans cet endroit? Est-ce que, sur l'autre côté, est-ce qu'il y a l'intérêt de secteur de bilan lucratif d'avoir des services dans ce quartier?
Non, je comprends votre point, mais on a l'argent disponible si le besoin est ressenti.
Il y a des pressions dans ce budget, c'est-à-dire à cause des pressions, finalement, on a suffisamment de l'argent pour l'instant d'avoir 11 centres municipaux. On n'a pas suffisamment d'argent maintenant d'avoir une 12e.
Pouvez-vous répéter ce que vous venez de dire?
C'est-à-dire, à cause des pressions avec les nouvelles lois, il y avait des pressions dans les budgets municipaux cette année pour notre centre. Ça coûtait plus cher d'avoir les autres, donc on n'a pas suffisamment d'argent d'avoir une 12e centre à ce moment.
Ouais, vous et moi, je pense qu'on a un différent là-dessus où l'espace était un espace de la ville à logement communautaire Ottawa au 380. Le logement communautaire protège l'espace. Il y a une discussion au niveau des services municipaux qui en est une que je comprends complexe parce que c'est une revue qui est plutôt globale avec les modifications qui sont apportées au règlement provincial. Je comprends cette dynamique-là, mais ça demeure, on peut pas, le logement communautaire nous réserve l'espace. Alors, si la ville est pas en position suite à une fois que les travaux vont être complétés, il va tout de même falloir que la Ville joue un rôle de coordination pour s'il y a un pourvoyeur de services francophone qui peut prendre l'espace. On peut pas s'en laver les mains de ce sujet-là. En fait, compte, l'espace est disponible. Le logement communautaire nous dit, dès que la construction est ouverte, nous, on est prêt à signer le contrat. On peut pas dire, il n'y a rien qui va arriver. Non, je comprends qu'il y a une dynamique. Est-ce que ça va être à la Ville ou est-ce que ça va être sur le marché? Mais il faut jouer un rôle, surtout pour la communauté francophone de la Basse-Ville. Il y a un rôle à jouer qui
je crois qu'il y a un rôle pour indiquer qu'il y a de l'espace et puis de donner des renseignements et des sondages qui existent dans la communauté. Est-ce que c'est vraiment le besoin d'avoir un service dans ce quartier à ce moment? C'est absolument le rôle de la Ville et on va accorder ce renseignement sur n'importe lequel qui indiquait un désir d'avoir un service. Nous, on faisait ça à ce moment pour, par exemple, dans l'Est d'Ottawa ou dans les autres quartiers de voilà, sur notre liste de registration, il y a tel nombre de familles qui cherchent tel service. Ça, c'est maintenant disponible chez les agences, absolument.
Merci.
Merci, conseiller Fleury. Councillor Egley.
Thanks, Madam Chair. My question is more, I guess, process-driven than anything else. If I understand the recommendations correctly, we're looking at a plan going forward into 2017 and the funding of such a plan. How procedurally do we do that outside of the budget cycle? How does this committee approve money to be spent in 2017 before we get to the 2017 budget?
Essentially what you're doing is committing reserves. You're committing reserves to fund specific elements that are slid within the budgets of these existing programs. So these are not new funds. They're delegating reserves that are within the purview of this committee.
So what you're saying is, as long as the money's in a reserve, we can approve it at any time to be spent at any time? I just want to be clear.
Pretty much, yes. My understanding is, what we essentially are bringing this forward as part of the annual cycle. So the reserves have to be, collected. You have to have those dollars into the reserves, and then they're specifically dedicated for certain purposes. And this is one of the purposes that this reserve is dedicated for, is assisting with child care.
No, I appreciate that's what they're for. I'm more worried about the timeline. But you're saying we can give you authority to spend outside of this current calendar year, even though we haven't approved a budget for 2017 yet?
Yes, you can. Because we've done the same thing with respect to the plans that we're bringing forward. Council can approve these expenditures in terms of committing reserves that are required for multiple years.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Eglin. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. The first is, as I was reading the report, I was trying to find data on what the actual fee subsidy number is, and so that I turned to Appendix J of the report, which is page 54 of the actual plan. But I must admit I was a bit confused. I don't know if you have it in front of you. But so there's a chart on page 54 that talks about the 2016 subsidized rates. So we see the 2015 subsidized rates. Let's look at the infant category of $54.90, and then the 26 subsidized rate was $70. And I'm just trying to understand, is that the amount that we are providing under the new system? Is that the amount that we're paying for every subsidized child, or is that the amount that the family of a subsidized child needs to pay if they're on subsidy? I wasn't sure what those numbers meant.
No, those are the rates that we actually pay.
So where in the report do we understand what the ratio is between the amounts that you would pay the center and the amount that the family of this in position or owning the subsidy has to pay? And is it 100%, or is there a ratio?
It's very variable, and it's based on income. And there are some families who do pay some degree of top-up depending on what their income is, but the vast majority of families, and particularly more so as we move into prioritized wait list, are going to be 100% subsidized or very close to that by provincial rates. So it's more the exception or a smaller proportion of families who are paying a degree of copay towards their service, and it's based on their income. It's all financially tested, and they know that when they've actually done their application. That's part of why we do this all up front, so we don't have a family say, oh, I didn't know I'd have to pay something to it. They know immediately what they would have to contribute towards that care.
And so do these numbers then, the 2016 subsidized rates, are they generally, I mean, I'm looking at your average rate on page 55, so they look like they're generally market rates. You've established these to be rather akin to whatever a center is charging a non-subsidized child. Is that correct?
Yes, and our group does quite a bit of work around this. There's some variability according to sectors of the city and so on, but they do a lot of work around establishing what those rates are and working with the community around them so that they're a reasonable average rate.
So the significant increases between 2015 and 2016, particularly for the infant rate, would be a boon for most of the child care centers. So they would suddenly see for their subsidized children a much larger pool of revenue from the city as a result of, say, a 27% increase.
And some of this was also based on our own internal to make sure that there's an incentive around doing infant care and recognizing the costs, and that the rate established for it was simply too low.
Okay, thank you. My next question, sir, I just have two more, Madam Chair. Councillor Fleury alluded to this question, and I just wasn't sure. I just want to get back to the issue of risk. So you're putting forward a recommendation of ways of, or a strategy to fund the priorities. You have 4 different sources of funds for that. If I were to ask, what is the cost to us of doing this? What are the risks? What are the downside? How can we anticipate, yes, a potential risk moving forward? How would you answer that?
The primary risk depends on how much you want to intervene in provincial decisions related to childcare. That's always the risk. And considerably where the province is now establishing funding and looking at what is the relative number of families across Ontario that should wait or not wait for service, that is where the element of risk is if council wishes to intervene and continue to maintain services when the province decides not to. The balance of these elements, I think the monies that have been put out to minimize risk, and particularly the areas of investments in the agencies, we're looking at this from the perspective of, for a relatively modest investment of $1 million a year, we can avoid closures and the kinds of instability of agencies falling into financial trouble. So again, there's a lot of risk mitigation, I think, that's built into this. The longer-term risk annually is what do we do with provincial ebbs and flows in funding, and how much does council wish to intervene in those particular ebbs and flows?
If the Deputy Minister of Social Services were listening in on this conversation, would he or she say, look, City of Ottawa, you managed this actually very well, thank you very much. We gave you $2 million less, and look, you solved it. So, you know,
actually, the way we've actually managed this is true in the short term. However, based on their own funding formulas, more provincial dollars should come in. And I think at some point, I think you've raised an excellent point in terms of what previous governments have said to us very directly is that where councils decide to make decisions, you're kind of on the hook for your own decisions. What we need to be able to do is hold their feet to the fire in terms of where it's specifically their responsibility to make sure that those fundings continue to come in.
Okay, and my last question, Madam Chair, is just to follow up again to something Councillor Fleury raised. I was a bit surprised to hear the answer on the Beausoleil question, because I too had understood that what the council understanding was a temporary closure of that site. But then, if I understood correctly, there is not yet a decision to reopen that site in that location. Is that correct?
A lot of things have happened over the last year, and I think one of the key pieces of this is the whole notion of subsidy following the child, and what were the original financial constructs of Beausoleil. Beausoleil was a center where the parents essentially had to go to that center. Now in a floating subsidy, they'll have to take their subsidy and can move that around, and that's what most of the families did. They've been accommodated in the neighborhood. What we would look at going forward is, again, given the municipal mandate, the property becomes available, it is out there. Our fundamental mandate is to operate in communities where there are no other not-for-profit and or other school boards willing or interested in doing those services. So that would be one of the questions we would ask. In addition to this, we'll be looking at the waitlist data and the other information. We know that overall, and we want to look at what the validity of these vacancy rates are. We have in region neighborhood as of today somewhere around a 7 to 8% vacancy rate. So that means that there is service available, and we have to balance all those things out before we would bring back a recommendation to say we want to open a new childcare, but you're now going to have to support it with another $1 million or more of 100% municipal dollars, because there isn't subsidy and there isn't enough demand in the neighborhood to fill it. So those are the kinds of things we would have to look at that point. Yeah, certainly our first notion here, as always, is that if there's a community or not-for-profit provider who is interested in providing service, they're the ones who should be considered first.
I guess the concern would be that the families of Beausoleil may well have managed the closure and they found slots elsewhere, but we don't know. I mean, my assumption, and we have to look at the actual data, is they found much less convenient locations. This is a fairly dense area. I know a lot of Councillor Fleury's residents were families, a lot of my residents were families, and the point is, even if they found a solution, that doesn't mean that there isn't a need to use a double negative or a Francophone centre in an area of our city which has a significant Francophone population. So
right. So at the same,
need to look at those needs.
The other balance is, of course, as Councillor Fleury mentioned, there's 300 new Francophone spaces coming in through the school board system, which are for 0 to 4. In addition to that, I think you've outlined 40% of the families that were attending that center were actually very happy with the result because it meant they were much closer to care where they actually wanted it, because they no longer had to go there. So that is one of the key things that in terms of looking forward is there a demand, as you indicated? Is there a need? Is there all of those other elements? And at this point, the other factor is that what the ministry has told us is that irrespective, that site will be a completely brand new license under brand new regulations. And we think that that will increase the operating costs of that particular center, and that's another factor in terms of when we're looking at and examining what the needs are. This isn't just this particular neighborhood, but it's always citywide. We're very interested in the vacancy rates, what's happening with those things. We want to make sure that we've got a very accurate picture of what the demand and the growth is, because on the one hand, we're trying to stabilize community-based providers, including those that are across the street from this particular location, and not wanting to open a center that would undermine and cause problems. So that's a balance we're doing now, almost neighborhood by neighborhood, and not just for Beausoleil.
Okay, so I feel assured that there will be a demographic, a geographic, and a linguistic analysis of the needs in that neighborhood as part of the recommendation on what to do with that site moving forward.
Not necessarily that site, because we don't own that site. If you were to establish any municipal center today, you would expect us to come forward with a recommendation that would say, here's the dollars, here's the investment, here's what you need to consider if you want us to open an additional site.
Well, but the public understanding is that was temporarily closed.
And that was our understanding, but a lot has changed since that original temporary closure, and that we're out of that site 2 years, and we now have new legislation that said it's a completely new license. There are now a whole variety of new costs associated with it, and we can't reopen it and do it within our existing budget envelopes either.
I think this conversation needs to be taken offline. I think there's some follow-up on that.
Yeah, I think this is a big discussion about the future, and because some of the funding's gone now, I mean, there's pressure. I mean, there's a gathering storm in childcare that's happening here. I think it's becoming evident today that in the short term it's been well managed, but it's been managed with our reserves. But those days are coming to an end, and when they do, we have big issues. I mean, we have issues with the municipal mandate and municipal childcare facilities that we have. We have issues with the lack of funding that we got from the province, and it sounds like we're competing against Toronto on demographics, if you will, and they seem to be winning in terms of getting more money and we're getting less, and that's a big problem for us. So and it all knits together because there's only a certain amount of money, and if we had lots of money, we could it might be a different conversation. But I agree with you, demographically, geographically, and linguistically, we have an issue that we need to address. So Mr. Burry, or Dr. Burry, I don't know, what's the time frame for addressing the issue of Beausoleil and the other municipal child care facilities?
Well, my understanding with the head of the administration at OCH is the intent is to put out an RFQ for that particular location for a child care center, Francophone child care center at that location. That to me would start to answer a lot of the questions. As I answered earlier in French, obviously as a service manager, we would provide all the service data and the requirements. We have been confidentially approached by not-for-profit providers who are interested in expanding existing programming in that neighborhood that would be consistent with what their mandates are and what they're looking to do. So on the basis of that RFQ, if those agencies are looking at doing it, then at that point I think it fulfills the need in the neighborhood. They will want that information from us to know whether it's going to be a viable location. Our assumption is that it would be. I also mentioned earlier that given this would look like a growth, in other words, it's adding new spaces to the system, this would be one of those projects that could also be included in the development charges, because this would be above and beyond the existing services, so some of the capital to help offset some of the things that need to be done at that location. So it's premature, I think, in its early days. That's the process that OCH has outlined. I've had those discussions with them in terms of an RFQ for that location for Francophone daycare. Once that goes out, then the next steps would go from there.
Okay, thank you. Is that it, Councillor? Councillor Brockington.
Just some high-level questions about some of the statistics. The 8,830 children on the waiting list, are these kids that need a spot today, or could they be kids that whose mom...
No, this is a registry. It is not a wait list. So those are 8,000 children that are registered for care, and this care can occur anytime between the next 6 months up to the next 5 to 6 years.
Okay.
Parents have the ability to go in and reflect what it is that they're looking for and actually put their name into the registry. It may also affect or include families who have care, who are looking to transfer or relocate, or looking to the future to plan out those services. In the future, what I've discussed with Rachel is we'll provide a much better detailed breakdown once we've had a couple of years and cycles around what those numbers actually compose and what does that start to look like.
Do we know, though, how many are waiting for care who are not placed right now this second?
No. It's not possible to do that with that registry, no.
Okay.
Because there's a difference between what someone indicates they will do and how many they'll say, I'll actually accept it as of today.
How do you know that number 8830 is accurate?
Because we have a system that requires parents to go back in and re-register in the system every X number of days, so that this is one of the ongoing issues with respect to registries, is the numbers generally overinflate. And part of our purpose today of giving you that number was to show that that's substantially down from what used to be projected in Ottawa in terms of the number of families seeking childcare. It's not in the 20 and 30,000 number. It is a much smaller number. And now in the future we'll be able to bring back more details around what's the composition of that in terms of age groups and so on, based on what we can glean. But the original intent was to provide a number in a registry so that parents can register and connect to the services.
Okay. In the table, the funding stream table, table 1 on page 9, you indicate the various sources that sum up to the $5.7 million. The first one, it sounds self-explanatory, the repairs and maintenance base funding. What specifically does that money go towards? Repairing and upgrading facilities?
Those are standard grant monies that have been made available, and child care typically apply for funding that can go for typical maintenance issues that are overall. It's not to build a new center, but it's generally to deal with the ongoing wear and tear that happens in child care.
And we don't have a repair and maintenance backlog?
We don't at this point.
Okay,
we've been under expending. That's why we're able to transfer. And there's other sources that the province has made available now.
And it's obviously not sweatered for that exclusive purpose. It can be transferred to other purposes. Yes? It's not sweatered specifically for repair and maintenance.
No, this is our recommendation to the province of how we're going to utilize their funding.
What is the current balance of the child care surplus reserve? Was that what the surplus was in 2015, the $2.4 million, and you're just automatically transferring it, or is the reserve much larger than that?
There's approximately $3.5 million, which is what we're committing, and that's what this report commits. So we don't anticipate after this year that there will be additional reserves.
Similar to Trustee Nussbaum and others, we're talking about risk and future risk. I do think that needs to be developed a bit further, and I suggested to the chair a few minutes ago that there's a delegation this summer going to AMO. I'll be part of that with a few colleagues, but we will have the opportunity to register to speak with the minister one-on-one, and we could flag the funding issues, both present and future, with her as well, and I think there's some utility in doing that. Finally, on page 15, you talk about the total child care budget in the city, $120 million. We're funded by the province $107 million, therefore we contribute $13 million. Is this similar to other municipalities, Ontario? Are we the only ones who are out-of-pocket contributing, or is this across the board? I'm trying to see if there's a provincial trend that we can piggyback on and advocate sort of ensemble together, or are we...
I think primarily what you'd see is in the large urban centers, Toronto, Ottawa, Hamilton, you'll see investments. Okay. There are municipalities who do not do anything above the absolute legislative requirements.
Okay.
Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Kakish. Okay, anyone else on the child care services plan? Carried on the plan? Thank you. Turning then to items number 6 and 7. We're almost quorum issue. He has to leave too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where are you going? Okay, Dr. Burry.
Thanks very much. We have one final presentation for you this morning, and it'll deal with both items 6 and item 7 on the agenda. And basically, Janice is going to provide you with a brief overview of the two reports as they relate specifically to housing. What we also felt we want to take the opportunity this morning, in addition to providing these two reports, which are largely housekeeping in nature, these are related to funding and the things that we need to do once per term, is to provide some examples of the key accomplishments with specific workloads in housing. In addition, to look at what work is underway the balance of the term. And I think it's very important that we have a bit of an understanding of the two announcements, both the provincial and the federal, although we don't have the details of what those mean locally, to be able to provide you with an update on what we've heard so far from those two levels of government. And certainly because we anticipate that whatever those two announcements mean will help us to accelerate our 10-year plan. So on that basis, I'm going to ask Janice to provide you an overview of the two reports.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to talk about all the great work that's underway in the community around the 10-year plan. So I wanted to start with a few points as it relates to the two reports that are being tabled here today. So the first one is, on your right or left, I guess, depending on how you're sitting, on residential services. So the funding and the responsibility for residential services was transferred from the Ministry of Community and Social Services over to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing in 2013. So given it was a new program for MMAH, they committed to reviewing the standards. So the results of that review was that they provided a new framework for municipalities to consider. Previously they had 40 different categories under the previous standards, and so they came back with 8 broad categories. In 2006 we had already developed some very robust standards. It was actually a model for other municipalities. Actually, Clara Frere, my colleague, was responsible for it and did an excellent job. So it put us in very good standing. So there are no major changes in the standards attached to this report. It was a matter of changing some of the language, organizing things in a different way, maybe increasing certain expectations. So there were an opportunity, as I said, to clarify some roles, to outline some service expectations, things like complaint and feedback processes, more specific information about food services, around hot meals, special diets, that sort of thing. There are no financial implications related to this, and there was fairly robust consultation leading to the report, and those were reflected in the report. As for the grants and contribution report, the reason why it's here today, mainly housekeeping, in terms of the fact that we have to come once per term of council to just review the existing city-funded programs. They need to be reaffirmed, essentially. But also included in the report is 3 different changes that we're looking for in terms of the housing services. So as Aaron mentioned earlier, the recommended changes have no financial implications. They're actually an opportunity to streamline our services a little bit and increase direct services to clients. So in terms of the first one, we were successful last year in developing a coordinated access for intake. So when it related to the Housing First model. So it made sense to us to look at the Supports to Social Housing program and ensure that it followed the same intake process. The benefits to that is it reduces the time that agencies have to do outreach. It ensures that there's a fair and equitable and transparent approach to match clients, and it's all done in a consistent manner. The second set of changes we're recommending here is simply a realignment under the $14 million Housing and Homelessness Investment Plan. And we know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, so what we decided to do is on the next slide actually provide an overview of the realignment that we're suggesting. So there are 7 envelopes within the $14 million investment where the majority would remain unchanged. So where we're recommending changes is, as you see on the slide, envelope number 2, there was $205,000 there available. Now that funding is now being picked up by the province, so it is available to be realigned. The second change is around envelope number 3, employment supports. There is an opportunity to realign $100,000 as a result of the reduced staffing costs. So there was a total of $305,000, and this availability of funds, if you will, coincided with an increased demand for residential services beds. So there was capacity within the residential care. There's just not enough funding to expand the number of beds that we purchased from the providers. So therefore, the recommendation is to move that $305,000 from those 2 envelopes to add 35 additional beds in res services. And so the benefits are clear. More funding would go towards direct client services. The services in residential services are very much aligned with Housing First and the 10-year plan. It assists some of the most vulnerable clients, including people with mental health, physical disabilities, and seniors. And it also reduces the cost of much more costly interventions such as long-term care, hospitals, and other emergency services. So the only other minor change within that, within those envelopes, is around the $400,000 for employment services. The suggestion is within that $300,000 continues for the youth futures, and the other $100,000 be divided equally between psychoeducational assessments and an employer outreach strategy to grow the youth futures program. So those are the 2 reports. I'll just provide a little update in terms of some of the initiatives and the work that's underway related to the 10-year plan. As you know, we have 40,000 households who live in poverty in the City of Ottawa. They struggle to make ends meet. Every day they have to make choices about paying for rent, paying for utilities, or putting food on the table for their families. So essentially the city does need more affordable housing, and we do need supports as required. So in order to work together, we did an extensive consultation in 2013 to come up with those common goals to make sure that we're all headed in the same direction. And that engagement resulted in the 3 priorities that you see in front of you. Everyone has a home, people get the supports they need, and we continue to work together. And so these priorities have guided our work for the last 2 years since the 10-year plan's been in place. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but basically these are the key accomplishments over the last 2 years since the plans started in January 2014. We do have an additional 182 new affordable housing units approved and under construction. They're in different municipalities and wards across the city. We are looking at, we did, as a result of $400,000 from the city, we were able to create space at the Y, so we have 30 families fewer in the YMCA. I wanted to underscore bullet number 4. We have moved 201 of the longest, most chronic long-stay shelter clients. Currently, we have approximately 500 that fall into the chronic and episodic category, and so we are well on our way to housing 50% of those. I do want to underscore, though, that there would still be approximately 3,500 homeless, but they would not be the long-stay folks. We've been reinvesting through some creative mechanisms in the repairs, through refinancing, and we've also launched an interdepartmental committee. So we're working with 11 different departments across the city so that they're aware of the plan and so that they're also committed to aspects of the plan. And there has been conversations on the other presentations about advocacy. We do a lot of advocacy. We have an advocacy sub-work group that we work with. So we provide information for FCM, AMO, the long-term affordable housing strategy, and we were very involved with the federal election in terms of bringing information to the various candidates. So Aaron again alluded to significant announcements from the federal and provincial government. I'm going to outline those on the next couple of pages. I want to preface this by the fact that I wish I had more information for you. Actually, any details would be beneficial at this time. Unfortunately, it's impossible to speculate in terms of what the allocation will mean for Ottawa. Part of the reason for that is it may be proceeding based on allocation. It may be used to rebalance across different municipalities. It may be staggered over a number of years, and some of it will be based on expression of interest. But you see here some of the main categories in terms of working with people who are fleeing abuse. There is a commitment to housing allowances in support of housing, which is a little bit new for the province, which is great. They're talking about expanding the homelessness funding. Currently, we receive $35 million under that envelope, so $30 million means we would get a portion of that going forward. And of course, there's a lot of focus and commitment on research, performance indicators, and that sort of thing that the province will be working on, as well as some important transformational change, and they will be engaging the city staff in terms of participating in some of those. As for the federal government, they are also committed to significant funding in similar areas. So new affordable housing funding, funding for seniors, repairs, which is very, very much needed and welcomed. We are looking at investments for specific populations. And they're also talking about working on a national housing strategy for Canada, which would be very important, and we would expect some funding to come along with that. As information becomes available, you will see me here more often, I suspect. We will update committee and council on the various initiatives. We work very closely with the sector, with the community, with our partners. We will continue to work diligently with them and to make sure that this allocation complements and leverages the work that we're doing. And as I said, we continue to do that in a collaborative way. This will have no doubt a significant impact on the community, and will accelerate the plan, and will contribute to the fact that right now 61% of all of the funding in housing is city, 23% is the province, 16% is the feds. So by virtue of these investments, it will help, with the cost sharing for these. And I'll just touch very, very quickly in terms of some of the key activities that we have between now and the end of term of council. As I said, we're hoping to, not hoping, but we are going to house 250 of the long-stay clients into permanent housing. We do have $1 million that we will be reinvesting in the coming months in rent supplements and housing allowances. This will be helping families in shelters and as well as individuals. We're going to continue to build new affordable housing. We have an RFP out right now for to the tune of $8.7 million that closes mid-May. Those projects will keep going. They will be mixed-use housing. This will help reduce the number of folks in motels, and we will continue to help seniors and people with disabilities with repairs. We will, as I said, work very closely with the feds in the province to ensure that our objectives are aligned. We are looking at redesigning the emergency shelter system. We would like it purpose-built. We would like it to have the right number of beds. We would like to have programming available during the day so people are not required to leave at 9 o'clock in the morning and come back at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And we are looking at reinvesting savings to end, chronic homelessness by providing housing and supports. And in the coming months, we will be launching what I think will be a very exciting communication and public engagement plan and campaign to engage private sector and the residents at large to bring that awareness and potentially have them engaged. So in the end, where do we want to be in 2024? You've seen this slide many times. We would like to see no one living on the street. We will be ending chronic homelessness by 2024 and perhaps sooner with the investments. If people need a shelter, if they destabilize, we would like them to be rehoused within 30 days. We have to ensure that the housing stock is in a good state of repair. We want to reduce the number of people on the wait list. Currently, the wait list is 10,099. That is down from 10,224 the previous year. We understand that we don't want a concentration of low-income folks. We want mixed communities. People do need supports in many cases, and the more that we work together and the more that we have all levels of government with sustained and adequate funding, the more we'll be able to achieve these lofty and ambitious and important objectives in the next 8 years. So that's the end of my presentation, if there's any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Burrell. Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to declare potential deemed indirect pecuniary interest in specifically the item, but especially as it relates to alignment sub-item 5. As my daughter has a part-time job with the Shepherds of Good Hope, an organization which could potentially receive some of that funding. And the good news is, under the Act, you don't lose quorum when I leave.
That is good. But we could just separate out under realignment item number 5 and vote on it separately, correct?
You probably could, but I'd rather do that at council than here.
Okay. So you're just basically going to leave. Okay. Okay. Nobody else leave because you're quorum now. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep us here as long as possible. Just a couple of questions that I found the presentation very, very useful. First, on the residential services beds, I mean, the logic makes sense in the report. I just had a question because I don't know this area very well. What is the supply in the City of Ottawa? Are there lots of homes that are offering residential services bed that are vacant? So will it be easy for us to provide the subsidy, and then the folks who actually qualify will have no trouble finding houses that offer those beds, or what's the situation in the marketplace?
So there is vacancy currently. So there's approximately 1,300 across all the 31 providers. We purchase about 980 beds now. So this addition would bring us up to about 1,015, and there are vacancies within, and that's the beauty of realigning this money. And these are people who are currently in hospital, waiting for alternative situations, or living in very desperate situations with their family. So this aligns well, and it helps them with their vacancy rate.
Great, and I mean, I'm glad you did the two presentations jointly, because one of the issues that came up in the first presentation under the risk factor, I'm just trying to see if I can find that, was that you say here many RSH operators have reported challenges in maintaining their homes and providing the level of services required without the benefit of annual cost of living increases. So the subsidy funding, it just wasn't clear to me, is that coming from our budget or is that coming from the provincial budget, or are we administering the subsidy on behalf of the province?
So we are administering it on behalf of the province. It's a set budget of $8.9 million, and so and there is a daily rate that we provide. Because we receive the funding from the province, there is no cost of living adjustments, right? So what we try to do is as contributions, I don't want to get too technical, but as contributions from the residents increases because their Ontario Works and ODSP increases, we try to pass that on to the providers. So, and why they're feeling this pressure is, a lot of agencies and depend on those increases, and what we're seeing is a higher level of acuity. So folks that live here may be living there for 10, 20, 30 years, and as their needs increases, they would like to remain housed there. And so the response and the needs, and the demands on staff increase. We try to work very closely with the sector to be creative within the budget, and we are hopeful that savings are found on the emergency shelter services side, that we can reinvest and ensure that there are some increases provided to the providers.
But I guess where I'm going with this is, did you consider, of the $2.3 million that you're asking us to approve for reinvestment, did you consider using some of that money to increase the cost of living adjustment so that the operators, who it sounds like are perhaps in a state of slight anxiety about the fact that we haven't been able to give an increase in the subsidy. I mean, it sounds like there may be a risk for some of them of either offering quality care, potentially closing down, and are we creating a future risk by saying, you know what, we're actually not going to tackle your cost of living issue, even though we have $2.3 million extra. We're going to put it all into 35 additional beds, which on the one hand is great and it's wonderful, but on the other hand, are we not solving a problem that's going to affect actually a much wider group of actual users?
So the only realignment is $305,000.
Right.
So there was $2 million already in that envelope, and that $2 million envelope is that's okay.
That same question holds.
The same. It's the same. It's the same question. So we did provide an increase to the providers of 4% back in 2013 to make up for the past. We are looking at opportunities to increase the cost of living over time. As I said, we do believe there's going to be savings that will be reinvested here, and what they tell us is their vacancy issue is as important as the cost of living issue, because having a vacant bed is a problem for them as well. So they like the fact that we can increase the number of beds, and we will try to be as creative with them as possible in terms of, some economies of scale. Staff, continue to meet with them and look at how we can provide training and bulk and all those other things. And we fully expect over the next year that there will be some savings where we can reallocate and respond to some of those pressures that they're having.
Yeah, because this is coming from a position of supporting the program, and I just wouldn't want a situation where, we have a number of these centers folding, and then we're left with a much higher cost of dealing with them in some other form. My last question, Madam Chair, just relates to the slide on the federal funding. And I did a quick back of the napkin calculation, and if you look at the Ottawa population and do a ratio, and you take out the First Nations housing, the back of the envelope says, we might be eligible for up to about $45 million of this funding, perhaps even more if you take the urban population, because obviously that's where most of the housing shortage is. So I just wondered, from my point of view, this looks like a potentially wonderful injection of affordable housing dollars. $45 million over 2 years would represent a significant chunk. Are you seeing this in the same term as a potential extraordinary opportunity to help us with our 10-year strategy?
Absolutely. All of these bullets on the provincial and federal side absolutely are amazing opportunities, as we said, to move the agenda forward. It's people using the words, the stars are aligning, when you talk about the different levels of government and the work that's been done on a community level here. So we will be, we're well heeled, we're well poised to be able to get this money out in the best, most effective way in response to the needs of the community. So we're extremely excited. We're going to be very busy over the next couple of years. However, the last stimulus funding round, we received approximately $96 million for affordable housing and as well as repairs. We were successful in all of that. We were so successful we were actually able to receive money from other municipalities that were not able to get the funding out. So we've been through this before. Staff are ready. The sector's ready, and we're just anxiously waiting for the details.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Anyone else? Seeing none, carried on item number 6. Carried on item number 7. Carried. Thank you. Notices of motion. I do have one on behalf of Councillor Fleury. This is a notice of motion, therefore be it resolved that to encourage participation and the promotion of physical activity in Ottawa, that we encourage National Health and Fitness Day in Ottawa on June 4th, 2016, and be it further resolved that for the day of June 4th, 2016, as a step to increase participation and enhance the health of all residents, that the City of Ottawa offer 2-for-1 public swimming at all 20 city-operated swimming pools and 2-for-1 at all 17 city-operated weight and cardio rooms in recognition of the 2016 National Health and Fitness Day. And that's a notice of motion for the next meeting. Any other business? Inquiries? Adjourned. Thank you all.